Hi, everybody. We're here for another episode of Down Syndrome 21st Perspectives. I'm Lee Ferlisi, and I'm here with my co-hosts,
Ann Lewis,
Monique Johnson.
And we have a very special guest here today, Jane Friou. She is on the board of the Down Syndrome Association of Houston. She's been on it since 2023 to help with advocacy efforts for kids with Down syndrome. She's a native of Houston. She's a mom to Elise, who's 18 and has Down syndrome, and also the mom to Elliot, who's 16. She's passionate about local, state, and national policies that affect people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we're here to talk today about advocacy, to give parents with kids with Down syndrome or kids who have special needs some tips and ideas of what they can do, because it sounds like it can be a very challenging landscape when you have a child with special needs issues. Can you tell us a little bit about your story, Jane, and how you got into this?
Yeah, my firstborn child was a surprise baby with Down syndrome when I was in my 30s, and I was not expecting that. I don't know how gracefully I handled it, but I was kind of thrown into it, and then very quickly had another kid. So I had two kids under two. We were living in Dallas at the time. I didn't have any family close by, and I got plugged in with the Down Syndrome Association of Dallas, and had some people mentoring me. I went to a conference when my daughter was quite young and doing things that I think a lot of people with young kids with Down syndrome don't normally do, because it was, we weren't there yet. We were still in diapers and cribs and stuff. But I do remember there were moms of young adults or teenagers who were in that association who would really want to talk to us new moms about what they had learned along the way. And they were pretty intense. And I remember thinking, like, am I going to be like that when I'm a teenager?
I think she is.
And the answer is yes. You become, like, you want to help the other people when you've spent years doing this. So the first couple of years of it was just a blur. We kind of entered what one of my disability mentors, Kathy Snow, calls like disability world. Like, we did sort of everything disability that was allowed and afforded to us. When we moved back to Houston, we looked at putting her into a public school program, and so she joined that for kids with disabilities and stayed in that program for a number of years. And I was really kind of checked out of the process. I was a mom of two young kids, and I didn't know a lot of the lingo. I kind of trusted the school, and things just sort of happened. And, she developed, she grew, she got glasses, she got potty trained, and so I spent a number of years just kind of plodding along, feeling a little alone, feeling like, there was online communities to help, but in my own community, I felt like I was the only one going through what I was going through. So, so we've been back in Houston for, 15 years now. So this is now our home, and this is where we're kind of setting up for our future.
And did you feel like you were getting the help you need when she was in elementary school, or did you feel like suddenly you looked around and said, this is not working, she needs more?
I felt like I gave them a shot, and I think I gave them too long of a period, and like a whole year went by, and at the end of the year, I couldn't quite figure out what had been done at the school and how, like, she went to school and she participated in school, but like the progress was not there, and even the paperwork was not there. And that's kind of when I woke up a little bit to the process that, like, I need some help. I need some help. Like, I don't know how to do this. And the skills that I have had being a woman and being, a white woman in this world, like those were not working for me in a school system. So I was very lucky to hire an advocate really early on who kind of walked alongside me, and she's still my advocate today. So,
Wow.
and so I learned a lot through her, through those years. And, and again, I gave them a lot of grace and a lot of chances to ask for things and give them time to respond. And, kind of another year went by of not knowing her progress and a lot of bickering and arguing. So then I got a lot smarter about, okay, what are my options as a parent? And so I learned how to write special ed complaints and file for that, and my negotiating skills got a lot better.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit more? So what were some of those things that you did that worked in a school system that might not be giving you everything you need?
Well, one thing that worked for me, and that I am pretty passionate about telling other parents, is if you go in and don't know the lingo, you're going to get kind of steamrolled. So, I attended courses, I bought books, I went to education conferences. And then when I realized like those knowing wasn't enough, then I realized, okay, now I have the power as a parent to say, I don't agree with that. And like that's another really important part of the process is learning that you are an important part of your child's education team, and you have the power to say no. That's not okay. And if it still doesn't get better after no, you've got more options. I mean, there's a whole, there's procedural safeguards that outline all the ways to disagree with the school. And I learned all of them.
I believe
and I've been through all of them.
Can you give an example? I know you guys have 18-year-olds, but I have a 5-year-old who is not even, like next year would be kindergarten, and I'm trying to navigate this. So when you say learn how to say I don't agree with that, can you give an example of something that they would be doing that you wouldn't agree with that would be appropriate?
Well, it's pretty common in general ed classes to younger ages that they might have discipline charts, green, yellow, red.
Yes.
Well, guess who was always on red? And, I would just say, I understand that is your classroom management system for 22 of the 23 kids who might be in that class. But my daughter is going to respond to something different. And by the way, she already has a special education label and already has this sort of plan laid out that says something more positive. If she's going to, and I think it's kind of a terrible thing to do to any kid, to be honest. But but that could be a power struggle. It could be something very small like that, or it could be other things like your reading program isn't addressing her needs. And that was,
and I can relate to that.
Yeah.
With my son, Marley, 18, right? That the curriculum that they were using, I just kind of had concerns about it. And I asked and I inquired, is this the best curriculum out there? Right? What made you choose this particular one? Right? And even then, like you said, is it appropriate? They have to choose curriculums for everybody, you know what I mean? That's classified in that particular, if you will, disability area, not necessarily allocating, well, this is my experience, right? And so really, like, I believe I agree totally with what Jane said about really being present and being the advocate and saying, I had an experience with just talking about speech and occupational therapy for Marley, right? There's laws that require them to offer X amount of time for a child who's designated, who has a certain designation. But I was advocating that, hey, I think Marley needs more than that. Is there a way that we can, work that into his programming? But unlike you, I did have a positive experience early on when we moved back to Houston, and we've been here 10 years now, with Marley getting re-engaged into the public school system here. Comparatively speaking, though, coming from Atlanta and coming back to Houston, I felt like Atlanta had more resources available. And we're probably doing more innovative types of things. But that was just my personal experience. So I agree that it's advocacy is the key, being able to be present. You don't have to say, oh, I agree with that and sign off on the
but what if
the IEP.
You don't agree and does the problem then arise that there's not somebody to implement what would work for your children?
Well, you can always do an administrative law
The teacher
judge.
has 23 children, and how is she going to, you know what I mean?
Well,
like have a different curriculum for our children, or
Well, they're supposed to put in the, like she said, there's a safeguards, right? And it's written, right? It is in writing that tells you what's allowable, what's not. And I think for me personally, the example of the curriculum, I felt like it wasn't meeting what he needed. However, my question was, what else do you all have available, right? Have you explored other options? And this is specific to reading, because Marley's a visual. We know that they learn better visually, right? Yeah. Than auditory. They have to have those visual cues, right?
And did they respond to that? Did they help and change things?
I won't say that they completely changed. Will say that they augmented some of that to support what was happening. I also personally augmented some of those things for him outside of school. And I've shared this with Anne. I think acceptance too on the part of the parent, because I had certain expectations about what I wanted Marley to accomplish. And I also had to learn that some of those might need to be readjusted.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
So how did the school react when you said you were a white woman in Texas, was that a detriment that they just looked at you like, oh, you're just this?
Well, no, that's just more like coming from my perspective that I haven't faced a lot of discrimination until I had a kid with Down syndrome. Okay. And that's not everybody's experience, because that's my experience. You know, like I've faced, maybe some mild sexual harassment in the 80s or 90s or whatever, that was permissible. But so it was, the injustice came later for me that a lot of people experience throughout their entire life or historically or, So, I always try to be mindful of that. Like, this was like unbelievable to me, but there were plenty of other people who'd faced roadblocks in every part of their life, and having a kid with a disability was just one more.
Well, to your point, speaking as a Black woman, right, I think that that's very important. And I would say kudos to you for having that heightened sense of awareness, right? Because that's the key. I'm of the belief that if you're walking into a room or into an experience, you should check in with yourself. You know what I mean? Like, am I self-aware enough to know what I'm dealing with? Okay. Even as a Black woman, having had obviously experiences of discrimination and challenges, I felt like completely overwhelmed, right, with having a child coming to Texas. And you all kind of, maybe Anne knows a little bit of my experience, but, the local school where I was, they said, oh, we can't accommodate him. I mean, it's the school that he's zoned to. What do you mean you can't accommodate him? Well, we don't have the people on staff to do that. Well, the blessing was that he ended up at another school where they were amazing, right? And I was happy with it.
So you had to switch him out?
Yeah.
You had to move him.
Yes.
And so that's a lesson in what you were just saying, like a comment, like lowering it's not lowering your expectations, but it's, because I'm dealing with that, and I know where you had a lease is where I'm zoned to have Fritz. And I have called them like a couple years ago just to inquire about it, just because I've been hearing some things that is going on. And it was true. And it was amazing to me. And I thought, well, I did talk to one mother who had their kid there, and she fought and got a lawyer and won, of course, because it is the law. But all the things that the school needed to accommodate then over the months never happened. And it was, we're still interviewing. We're still looking for this. We, whatever. We haven't found the person yet. Or they were dragging their heels because they didn't want it. They were doing everything they could do to make her not succeed, even though this child was very high functioning and doing very well, really independent. But they just didn't, that's not what they wanted. They wanted, their program, I think, was more focused on autism. So anyways, she ultimately ended up pulling her child out because it was becoming such a negative. I want Fritz to walk into the school and everybody be like, Fritz is here, and high five him and be excited to see Fritz.
You want an inclusive environment.
Yeah, but if I'm going to go to a school where the principal and the teachers don't really want him, I don't know that I want to fight for that.
Well,
not everybody does.
Right, exactly.
But some
because I want
but some
him
people
to be
do.
happy and loved.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, Jane? You were talking about you started a group on Facebook and you wanted to grab people to go to board meetings, and you felt like you did not have the momentum that you needed.
Yeah. Around 2016, the state of Texas it was found that they had been denying kids with disabilities a label for special education to get services. And when that article came out, it really did kind of change my life, because my daughter had been in the school system since 2010, and I had had a lot of issues those last few years. And when that article came out, and it was a series of 8 articles and about how bad things were in Texas, I was like, oh, okay. So this is why.
This is why.
This is why.
You felt validated in a way.
I felt 100% validated. And then we were able to, I was able to find other people. And that was the biggest thing, because I didn't really feel like I had people. I was in a community of a school, but I was like the Lone Ranger, the angry mom, fighting everybody.
The hound.
Because there weren't very many kids with Down syndrome at your school. And it seems like each school has a couple.
She was probably the only one that I knew of for the most of her time in elementary school.
Yeah.
It's not the case in her other schools. But so I found some parents, and they were moms. They're all moms. And we were like, how did this happen? And we're like, we were pretty naive about it. Like, we did not know how school boards worked. We did not know who was we were like, let's go to a board meeting. Let's meet with school board members. And we found out very, very quickly that they were very willing to talk to us, very willing to meet with us, and desperate for us to educate them on what had happened. So we found very willing people back then, and if you spoke up about your kid with a disability, everybody listened because the spotlight was on. Exactly. And I remember talking to one board member. He's not on the board anymore, and I said, "How does this happen? Like, how does every school district in the state of Texas end up with the exact same percentage of special education and all these kids getting denied?" And he said, people on the board come from different backgrounds. I think he was an engineer or something. And he said, well, we just trusted what the district told us. Wow. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay. So anyway, that group kind of morphed into, we had a name for a while. We were Houston Parents for Inclusion. And then we decided to be a little more broad and be, because we wanted to be specifically for special education. So we started a group called Houston Parents for Special Education. Is that right? Mm-hmm. No. So it's Houston Special Education Parent Association. And we would, occasionally meet for lunch and talk about the issues. And we were looking at board documents and deciding what we would go speak on. And it became kind of a hobby.
Yeah.
So we had a private Facebook group that grew over years. There's a couple of hundred parents on it now. And then right around 2019, we wanted to start meeting, see if we could get people to meet and see if we could formalize this group a little bit. I had a group of parents. We kind of had a board assembled, and we had 2 in-person meetings, maybe 10, 15 parents came, and then COVID hit, and we stopped meeting in person, and then and that just kind of went away.
But you still have the Facebook, right? So
Facebook group is there, and it really is a group of parents helping parents. So it's the place if you're, the school says my kid can't come here. Well, if you were to get on my Facebook group and say that, I would say That isn't how it works. That's not the system. So you got to learn the system of how special education works, and you don't call up and say, can my child come here? You use the process of getting an evaluation, having a meeting, divining a plan for that, specific child, and then making that determination. And the person answering the call has no authority and can't predetermine that. So, those are the kind of things that I would help a parent with.
Does it fall under a 504, or is that separate and different, but the process might look the same? Because that sounds familiar of you call the school, you get a meeting, they evaluate, then you have another meeting, usually with all the teachers sitting around the table and the parents.
So they're similar but they are different laws. So the most important thing to know is that a 504 for now, because it's also under attack. A 504 is an anti-discrimination law. It's a federal law that just says a public entity cannot discriminate against you for having a disability. And then a special education plan or an IEP is under a different federal law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act,
which is under fire too.
Which is under fire too. But it's like parents like us, in the 70s fought to get our kids into school. And that's how that law got into place. So those two, the simplest answer is if you are under IDEA, you have more protections than a 504 plan.
Right.
So
exactly.
And typically kids with Down syndrome would always have an IEP because they require specialized instruction.
But there's still that process of you have to make the appointment with the school. Is that right?
Yes, there is when you ask for an evaluation on either a 504 or an IEP, it kicks off a timeline.
Yeah.
And that's why you do things in writing. You don't call, you put things in, you kind of inform yourself on, what they have this many days to respond to me. I have to consent to this. I provide, information
Do you
to
put
them.
things like that in your letters so that they know that you know what you're talking about?
I would.
Yeah, I would too.
I'm like, and I expect to hear from you within 15 days.
Right. And you have 30 days to do this.
And you have,
And they know who they're dealing with.
Yeah. And you can always attach, a little PDF from Disability Rights Texas. I send that one around a lot that has the timeline on it. I'm like, it really is a thing. It isn't when you say it, it's when you write it.
Correct.
It must be written that you are asking for this. And that kicks off a timeline.
And I was going to say, where can you find that? Where can you find that timeline? Is it somewhere where parents can access it?
I looked up those classes that you took, and they're no longer it's filled or over for the 24-25 session. It's shut down
to become
now.
an advocate,
The
to
one
learn more
that-
about advocacy?
Partners in Policymaking?
Yes.
Yes, you have to apply typically in the spring. You apply in the spring and it starts in the fall.
Okay.
Let's
And
back up and tell people
Yeah.
what is that? And you did it.
Texas Partners in Policymaking. Right after the denied article came back and it kind of turned into a angry parent advocate, I found out about this group called Partners in Policymaking and I applied for it, not knowing much about it. But I was selected to do it from about 30 people from around the state, all over the state. We would go to Austin and get training over one weekend a month about disability policy, communications, how to advocate, how to meet with your legislators, and just a lot of history of discrimination against our kids. So I graduated from that program. It would be an awesome program for either one of y'all to ever do. I highly encourage it. Several of my friends have gone on to do it and really enjoyed it.
Is it geared more towards education of your child or just everything?
Yeah, no, it's like each weekend is focused on a different part. So like your first weekend, this is a national program. They have these in all states. And it's, the first weekend is the history of disability and discrimination against our kids. And they'll do a session on employment. They'll do a session on education. They'll do a session on, living independently, communication in the media, how to approach, how to tell your story to a journalist, how to stay in the news, that was really helpful because I have a communications background. So that part was helpful. But part of that program is going to the Capitol and having a mock, hearing, and then you would go before in a hearing room at the Capitol, and you would have to.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was really cool.
I love that.
I learned a lot.
Listening to you, I have experienced the prejudice or discrimination with Fritz more because I'm not in the school system yet, but more for medical. So I'm wondering, do these, because when I actually just got off the phone with my daughter who's at Texas A&M in education, and she had a class, and they had a guest speaker a mother talking about her child who she went to pick him up, and she saw that he was sitting in the hallway crying, and she stood back and watched, as multiple teachers and employees walked past this student and didn't say anything to them. And, and then the teachers will tell the parent, oh, well, he was doing this again today, and he was doing this again today. And then the mom, is like, can I just have one day where I don't, whatever. Mm. And the poor little boy said to his mom, I feel like I did in my journal. And she was like, what? And so she goes and she finds a journal in his room that was basically like saying he didn't want to be here. Mm. Like, not a suicide note, but, it was like that. And I think what I've experienced is that a lot of doctors or maybe even teachers or whatever, they just want to be like, oh, well, that's because he has Down syndrome. So, whether it's the thyroid or whatever, it's like, no, he's a person.
Human being.
Maybe they tend towards these things, but let's still try to make it optimal as you would try to make mine optimal. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, medical advocacy is like, sometimes you have to do both at the same time. You're doing medical advocacy, you're doing education. But the one thing I learned in my training is there's always the opportunity to educate somebody, and there's always the opportunity to just leave. That not everybody is in a position to want to learn.
Or to influence, to want to even desire to influence change.
Right. And so, and that is part of our work as parents, I think, of like reading the room a little bit. Like I kind of learned to walk in and say, like, is this a doctor? Is this an educational team that I can work with that is open to my input? Because when I walk in, I am the expert.
Exactly.
You went to medical school, but I am the expert.
I'm the expert on my child.
And I come in with that kind of energy. Exactly. And people are either okay with that and meet me there, or they dismiss me. And if they dismiss me, I think,
yeah,
then I'm here for it. Then I'm ready to hear.
I mean, really, I'm a customer here. Like this. This is we're lucky. We're in Houston. We have a big city. There are other doctors.
So far I've pulled out and just been like, I'm going to go find the person that will deal with my child. I haven't been like, I'm going to go change every pediatrician in Houston to believe in what I know needs to be looked at.
Well, I like what you said, and you too, Ann. I think that the main thing that I'm hearing is that you are the advocate. You are the expert, right? We're the subject matter experts for our kids. And when we show up, we bring your toolkit, make sure you know what you need to know in order to advocate, in order to get things done. And sometimes that means saying, you know what, I'm amongst friends, or I'm amongst allies, or I'm amongst, people who are not going to hear me right now. And that, for me, that's what's been most important. But to your point about advocating in the judicial system, I've shared earlier in an earlier podcast that one of the opportunities I had in working in child welfare was to advocate for kids who had special needs and didn't have parents, or maybe they did, maybe they were in foster care. And I feel like that was God's way of preparing me for Marley. Later years down the road, 20, 30 years down the road. But the blessing is that we can all create community, which it sounds like you've done with your groups.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say that's the kind of the missing piece to like walking into a doctor or a school and feeling confident that what you're saying is true, is having a community of people that also are going through that. So like, my daughter has a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and then years later, one day I thought she was losing some skills. It was during COVID. We weren't sure what was going on. She ended up getting a juvenile idiopathic arthritis diagnosis, which autoimmune conditions in our kids are actually not that uncommon. But that's a really difficult diagnosis to to get in a typical developing kid, much less a kid who doesn't express a lot of pain but so like finding the people who, and so thank goodness for social media, there's a Facebook group for people with Down syndrome who also have arthritis. And there's 50 of us. It's a pretty small group, but like that gives me the confidence to walk into the rheumatologist and say like, hey, I'm on this group because I know this rheumatologist is not reading.
They don't know.
Reading what's happening in Ireland with juvenile arthritis and Down syndrome research.
Exactly.
But I do.
Exactly.
And I'm like, can I send you this research that's going on? Can we talk?
Yeah.
And she's pretty open to that. I've had people that are pretty open to that. But coming from that place
What
of like,
causes that? Is it a common thing?
it's just one of the bazillion autoimmune things that can happen in your body. So your body is attacking itself and it's attacking the joints. So your joints are deteriorating, but it's just, and she has other autoimmune conditions, but,
well, and in talking about medical advocacy, which is going to be a future podcast, by the way, we're going to be talking about having someone join us to talk about the impact of the Down syndrome community and the research that's being conducted on Alzheimer's.
Yes, and if y'all aren't in the national NIH system, get in there because that's where all the research is happening.
Yep. That's great.
So future podcasts. So if you know people that can come in and shed light on that, we'd be open to that too. But that's future medical.
Well, let's talk about any tips that you would leave people with that you have found during your journey of advocating for your daughter and helping other people to advocate.
Yes, I had somebody give me a book that probably one of these intense parents that I had met early on my journey. They gave me this book and I must read it. And of course I didn't. And then I think we moved and years later I thought, I keep moving this book. I haven't read it. And then I read it and I was like, this is actually a really amazing book. And then the author of the book I met when I was doing the Partners in Policymaking program. And that was a really nice moment. I sloppy cried when I met her. But, she gave me some ideas of just saying we don't have to do disability the way it is done. And her term is when you have a kid born with a disability, you enter disability world and then you're just in it. And it is its own world and it's its own force and it pulls you this way and you're going this way and everyone else is going, an opposite direction. And, you don't need anybody to give you permission to not do something, but she kind of gives parents permission to say, you don't have to do that. You don't need to do that. Your child is perfect the way they are. We're not sending them to therapy to make them not have Down syndrome. We're sending them to therapy to give them the extra support that they need. But so that was really important to me. And that kind of shifted my thinking when my daughter was about 4 or 5, that I thought, I didn't think much about the future. She was young and I had 2 little kids. And so but when I would think about where she was at 4, I'm like, well, you can't be in this self-contained disability bubble your whole life. And then when you're out of school,
they say life is not a special needs classroom.
Yeah. I was like, but wait a second, that doesn't really line up with what I want for her. And I just kind of had to wrestle with that myself. So I think giving yourself permission to change your parenting philosophy over time. You may, give yourself a little bit of grace. You did the best you could while when you were there, and now you know better, and so you do better. So, I mean, that's kind of one big piece. And then with all the special ed stuff, I would just say the empowerment piece is really educating yourself. And I have books that I tell people. There are other organizations. My organization doesn't really train people, but there are people that do. There are IEP clinics that run every week, every month in this town, virtually online. You can go to a conference, you can read a book. There's a lot of tools out there, and there's paid advocates, there's free advocates, but having somebody that sits alongside you that helps you, validates your decision. And they also force you to say well, what do you want? what do you want, Jane? What do you want for her? And I'm like, yikes. Like
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Like
more. I want more.
Yeah. But what?
Right.
You know, so
Exactly.
they would,
Being very clear.
got really clear. And I think just, I stopped, I feel like for the first couple of years, I apologized to myself, and maybe in the way I presented, at least there was always a little bit of an apology of like, I was excusing things. I'm like, well, and this book,
Or thanking them for dealing with it. I feel like I do that a lot.
Yeah.
Like, you're such an angel. I'm so happy and grateful that
and
I
then
have
I was
you.
like, well, if she's hearing me say that, my
How is that making
daughter,
her
how is
feel?
that making her feel? And then how am I presenting? And I have a communications background, so I believe in like
words matter.
words matter and how we're
Yes.
communicating that. So I started like, stopped really seeing her as a burden that other people were going to have to endure.
Figure out how to,
and but that was me. Like I had to change that first. And again, I can't change everybody, but I can change how I present her and how I accept her. And that's been a really good,
That's beautiful.
really good gift.
That is amazing.
Did that book
Love
help
it.
you get there?
For me, it did. It's not a beautiful book. It's actually, I thought it was a cookbook that somebody gave me because it's like a spiral bound book or something. It's not, but her message is really no nonsense. And that's kind of my approach.
What's it called?
It's called Disability is Natural. And like the opening line of the book is sort of like the quote that I always use as my like guiding quote, which is like, your wonderful, perfect child your wonderful child who happens to have a disability is perfect and has a great life. I mean, it's just a simple little line, but it's like,
And I
they
totally
deserve a
agree
great
with
life.
it. I love it. I totally agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Is there anything you would ask or add, Anna Monique?
Well, I would
gosh.
just say that
Gosh.
I'm just super excited. Obviously, everybody, our audience probably knows by now that we're new to this. But as Jane said, I'm so glad that you all created the platform, right? In the same way that I'm so glad that Jane took the initiative to create the platform that you've created. And so that's the idea.
Yeah, people do
We
not
just
want to be
continue
alone.
No, and we could just continue to create that,
Yeah.
and we know how we all met, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the beauty in this, I think, and in talking about what you gained from that book, I told Marley, for as long as he's been able to articulate, I said, you're going to confess in the mirror that God made me exactly the way he wanted me to be. And so for him, hearing him say that affirms that I believe that.
Yeah, we do that.
I
My
believe
husband,
that.
someone told us, there was an Instagram reel going around and they had the little boy in the mirror, the mom was getting him ready for bed and he was saying things like, I am beautiful, I am smart, I am talented, I am
Absolutely.
strong, I am brave, like those kind of things. So we do that with him every night. But Jane, let me ask you, and this is personal for me, but hopefully it's helping other people that are listening. So when I talk to people who are in the school system and they just complain and say, the IEP isn't getting met for X amount of years and my child isn't making any progress on the IEP, which is a lawsuit in its own right. But I think to myself, I have Fritz at a homeschool, a wonderful woman who has lovingly taken Fritz on, and she has, I think there's 8 total now, but it was maybe 6 or something when he started. So he is with other children, and those children are all typical learners. And he's doing great. And my question is, if I have that situation, is there a benefit to taking him out of that situation when next year would be kindergarten? Socially, I think, I don't know. I have these like high hopes, like, oh, maybe he'll, meet these like have all these like typical friends and they're all going to help him. And maybe he'll join the basketball team and be the water boy or just have these more social things. Or is he better off in a smaller environment where he's learning and getting this one-on-one and like really excelling educationally and probably socially? I don't know. I mean, I know financially it'd be so nice to not have to spend money on his education.
I mean, I would never take a kid out of a school that was working.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you're a big public school advocate, or I just didn't know if there's
If it's working for you,
I'm a public school advocate because a lot of kids with Down syndrome are social and like peers, and that is hard to find in a non-public placement.
Absolutely would
I
not
agree.
homeschool
So
myself.
I totally agree.
I mean, I'm a public school advocate because for my daughter, there are no other options.
Right.
And so there is no option for the IEP not being implemented.
Right.
That's what
The
we need to
IEP
do.
will
We
be
need to
implemented.
start a school.
The IEP will be implemented.
Yeah.
Or you will be hearing.
Exactly. Or you will be not.
Yeah.
You will be in violation
Or the
of the law.
TEA will be doing an
Yeah.
investigation.
So I would like to just say thank Jane for being here, and I know you're going to do that, Lee. But it's a full circle experience, right? Because Anne knew you, and I've known you, so we have created community.
We have a community.
Wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would do without
Super
the
excited.
community. Like I've called you, Jane, many times to just be like, "Oh my God, what do I do about this?"
You're doing awesome, Anne.
You are.
Well,
You are doing.
You all
You
are.
really are. And you will, and I tell you that all the time. It's a journey, right? It is. It's
Yeah.
not a sprint.
But I love
It's a
what you said about,
marathon,
like, I
and
think I
it's-
need to read that book because when I first got out of the hospital and I researched and I found these people who were doing these alternative things, I felt like I'm going to fix him. Like I literally felt like I was going to like fix him and no one's going to really know he has Down syndrome. And then, as time marches on, I'm either like falling behind and not doing all the things that they told me to do, which is absolutely true. And then you feel bad about that. But then you also get to the point where you're like, I'm not going to fix him. I'm going to accept.
Well, and if you have other kids, which we all do, we're not comparing our other kids.
Yes.
To
I'm
other
not,
kids.
I'm not upset that my son's not the
Yes.
quarterback of a football team.
Right.
Yeah.
So
At
I
all.
don't know why we put that pressure on
Right.
ourselves for those
Right.
kids.
And
They're-
it's true, but I think the order of hers is a little bit
Yeah,
different.
it's true.
Because Fritz is your last.
Yeah.
Right?
Fritz was a whoa surprise.
Right.
last.
Whoa here too. Whoa here. We have that in
Like,
common too.
whoa. Like,
Yeah. And mine was my first. And I
Right,
only
exactly.
knew how to parent a baby with Down syndrome. And then I had one without Down syndrome. I was like, this is what a baby is like?
yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Who knew? They just sit up.
Right.
They
They
just
don't
walk.
need a trunk thing, right?
They just
don't have
eat
the
and don't
hypotonia.
throw up all the time. Like, huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
Oh my
Wow.
gosh. The
Well,
joys, right?
Yeah. Thank you for all of this. This has been an amazing amount of information for a lot of people. I'm sure they're going to be able to get a lot of use out of it. And Jane, I want you to know you are our first guest on Down Syndrome 21st Perspectives.
Thank you for having
So
me.
that is, yes.
Thank you, lady.
You hold a very special place in our hearts. So thank you everybody for joining us. I'm Lee Ferlisi. I'm here with my co-hosts, Ann
Ann
Lewis
Lewis.
and Monique.
Yes.
And we hope you join us again. And we will put information out there. Jane, you mentioned a book. You mentioned the plan. So that people can have that information at
yeah.
their fingertips too.
Timelines, sure.
All right. So thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you on the next
you.
episode.
Thank you, Lee.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.